boxing matches where you see two guys just slugging it out, one guy lands a punch, and yeah, he landed a good punch. What Jake did is he slid back and landed a punch.
Yeah.
It's like the athleticism along with the intelligence, the technique. I'm like, he's not even doing it that way.
She just destroyed boxing with one Instagram story, and the fallout is about to obliterate everything you thought you knew about this sport. We're talking about whispers behind closed doors, predetermined outcomes, and a scandal so deep it makes you question if anything you've ever watched was real. Anthony Joshua, one of the most legitimate heavyweights on the planet, is caught in the crossfire of something that goes way beyond just throwing punches. This isn't about who wins or loses anymore. This is about whether professional boxing as we know it even exists, or if it's all just an elaborate show designed to separate you from your money.
Anthony Joshua knocks out Jake Paul in the 6th round of their contest. And even though you could argue that the finish was quite conclusive, I can't remember many fights where I've walked away where there's still so many questions being asked. Questions around how real this fight was. The final video I made before this fight was, is this fight real or is this fight fixed? And we need to have a conversation about this. We still may not have the answer to this question. People are now going to wonder, how much does Anthony Joshua have left as a heavyweight?
Here's where this whole mess really kicks off, and it's not where you'd expect. Forget the bright lights and roaring crowds. The real decisions happen in quiet boardrooms where suits discuss fighters like their stock options. These aren't passionate boxing fans making calls based on who deserves what. These are business people calculating risk versus reward, and they've figured out something terrifying. They've realized that controlling outcomes is way more profitable than letting authentic competition decide results. Think about that for a second. In rooms you'll never see, people who have never taken a punch are deciding how fights should go. They're not just promoting battles, they're engineering them. And when Anthony Joshua's name gets thrown around in these discussions, that's when you know we've crossed a line that should never be crossed.
Really surprised about this. Like, seriously, is there anybody that is actually surprised that Anthony Joshua just absolutely wrecked Jake Paul? Like, there should be nobody shocked about this whatsoever. This was literally such a mismatch from the beginning. We all knew that coming into this. But, I mean, shout out to Jake for taking this matchup, right? Obviously, he was way in over his head. We all know that. But I feel like the most shocking thing to most people is the fact that Jake even made it as long as he did, right?
But here's the kicker. Boxing survives because nobody knows what's going to happen when two fighters step into that ring. That uncertainty, that genuine risk, that's what keeps millions of people glued to their screens at 2 in the morning paying $50 for pay-per-view. The moment fans start suspecting the outcomes are predetermined, the entire sport dies. Not slowly, not gradually. It collapses overnight. And that's exactly what we're staring at right now. Because these rumors aren't just about one fight. They're about a systematic approach to turning real combat into entertainment theater. When legendary fighters start whispering about conversations that happened before gloves were even laced up, about limitations that were agreed upon in private, about damage that was supposedly never supposed to happen, that's when you realize this goes deeper than anyone imagined.
You know, for me, in my opinion, I think it's scripted a little bit because, you know, of the weight difference, and, you know, Joshua is a former, you know, champion. And also, you know, he's current, he's active, you know, and this is going to be the first time that we see Paul, you know, fighting an active fighter. You know what I mean? We seen the Mike Tyson, that was all fun, that was cute, you know what I'm saying? It's fun and games and stuff, but now you're dealing with a real professional, you know, and so we'll see how it ends up you know, like I said, I think it's scripted.
Now let's talk about Anthony Joshua, because this man represents everything that's supposed to be sacred about this sport. Olympic gold medalist, multiple world champion, a fighter who's been knocked down, gotten back up, and rebuilt himself under the harshest spotlight imaginable. His career has been an open book of legitimate wins and devastating losses. When he got dropped by Andy Ruiz, there was no conspiracy. When he outboxed Ruiz in the rematch, he earned it. When Alexander Usyk schooled him twice, those were real defeats that hurt his legacy and his bank account. Joshua has operated under the traditional rules of boxing for over a decade. Win and you get rewarded. Lose and you face consequences. No safety nets, no predetermined outcomes, no backroom deals to protect his image. That's what makes him such a powerful figure in this current controversy, because his entire career proves that real boxing still exists.
Was the fight fake? No, but was it rigged? Yes, entirely. Boxing didn't die tonight, but it's just been shown that it is entertainment and a behemoth of money spinning, and it's not a sport. Now, the first thing that showed the fight was rigged was at 2 minutes 19 left on the clock in the 6th round. Anthony took a nod from someone once Jake had been put down to finish the fight. The other tactics that AJ did to sell the fight. Right from the outset, AJ only threw jabs, which were at the...
So, on one side, but then you have Jake Paul, and this is where everything gets complicated. Paul didn't come up through traditional boxing channels. He didn't spend years in amateur tournaments or small venues building his skills. He leveraged social media fame into boxing relevance, and here's what's wild about that approach. It actually worked. Paul figured out how to monetize attention better than fighters who'd been grinding for decades. He turned boxing matches into content events, and suddenly he's making more money per fight than legitimate contenders who have been working their entire lives for a shot. That success gave him something most fighters never get. Control. Real control over his career, his opponents, and his narrative. And when someone with that much control starts talking about fights with established champions, that's when the traditional boxing world gets nervous, because Paul doesn't need boxing's approval. He's got his own audience, his own platform, and his own rules.
Word go. The tactical look of this fight, the way the two men blended, it was not an attractive fight to watch. And many watched it in my live stream in sheer disbelief that Anthony Joshua was going rounds with Jake Paul. It seemed like an impossibility that the two men would be able to stay in there together for multiple rounds. Anthony Joshua being so much more the experience, so much more the physical and just better boxer with actual achievements in the sport of boxing. Jake Paul being the boxing disruptor.
Here's where it gets absolutely wild. When rumors started circulating about a potential Joshua versus Paul fight, the immediate reaction wasn't excitement, it was suspicion. Industry insiders started whispering about conversations that allegedly happened before any contracts were signed. Conversations about what kind of fight this would be, what level of intensity would be acceptable, what outcomes would serve everyone's interests best. And listen, these aren't confirmed facts, these are rumors. But they're rumors coming from people who have been in boxing for decades, people who have seen how these deals really get made. The suggestion is that Paul's team wanted assurances. Not guarantees about winning, but guarantees about surviving. And Joshua's team allegedly was presented with incentives to make sure the fight looked competitive, looked entertaining, but didn't cross certain lines.
Still competitive in the heavyweight division, and he's only doing this for money. Like, he's still set up for world title fights. After he knocked out Ngannou, you could still set him at, like, Joseph Parker just lost. You could set him up with Joseph Parker. You could have, until a year ago, he could fight Deontay Wilder.
You're saying that the lineage and the trajectory that Anthony Joshua is on, if he happens to go a little bit too gentle and lose...
Now this is precisely where boxing fans should be terrified, because if these rumors have any truth to them, we're not talking about fixing fights in the traditional sense. We're talking about something more subtle and more dangerous. We're talking about managed violence. The idea that two professional fighters would step into a ring with predetermined limitations about how hard they can actually fight. Think about how insane that concept is. Boxing's entire foundation is built on the premise that once that bell rings, two athletes are going to give everything they have to win. If that's not happening, if there are secret agreements about pulling punches or avoiding certain types of damage, then what we're watching isn't boxing anymore. It's performance art with the potential for brain damage.
He's not the same size. In what world does Jake Paul, in any facet, even touch Anthony Joshua? And if this is a real fight, which I think it is, it will be the most watched Jake Paul fight because he will get knocked out. For Anthony Joshua, he wins a decision to Jake Paul, or he were to lose by split decision, that would do more damage to his career than anything he's ever achieved. This would...
And get this, Anthony Joshua's response to all these rumors has been fascinating. Complete silence. No angry denials, no social media rants, no desperate attempts to control the narrative. For a fighter of his stature to remain completely quiet while his reputation gets dragged through this mess, that tells you something significant is happening behind the scenes. Fighters who have nothing to hide usually defend themselves loudly and publicly. Fighters who are dealing with legal complexities, who are navigating contractual obligations, who are trying not to make a bad situation worse, they stay quiet. Joshua's silence isn't admission of guilt. but it's definitely acknowledgement that this situation is way more complicated than the public realizes.
So I think he wants to get knocked out on purpose. He got Anthony Joshua, one of the biggest knockout artists in boxing, and he is going to be horrifically knocked out in front of tens of millions of people live on Netflix. And this will turn Jake Paul into a sympathetic figure. I can already see the Instagram post of him in the hospital with all the tubes in his nose, and the comments under it like, "Get well soon, Jake, you're so brave. Hard."
But wait, it gets worse. Because while Joshua stays silent, Jake Paul's team has been subtly shifting their narrative. They've started talking about boundaries that were allegedly crossed, about agreements that were supposedly violated, about damage that exceeded expectations. And that language, that specific framing, is absolutely terrifying for boxing. Because harm isn't an accident in this sport, it's the entire point. Fighters accept the risk of serious injury because that's what makes victories meaningful. To retroactively claim that someone got hurt more than they were supposed to get hurt, that fundamentally challenges the nature of combat sports. If fighters can later argue that their opponents were too aggressive, too violent, too effective, then every knockout becomes a potential lawsuit.
What he was actually doing was aiming for Jake's shoulder, so it was just deflecting all the power and all the blows. AJ could have finished this fight at any second from round 1, but he didn't. So kudos for Jake for taking the fight, and kudos for Jake taking the broken jaw. But if AJ had literally walked in on his shot as he should have, he would have died. If you look closely, AJ's last shot was from distance, and what I mean is have a look at his back leg. It is further out.
Now, here's the part that should scare every boxing fan. The legal whispers are getting louder. Sources are talking about potential financial penalties, about breach of contract claims, about the bizarre possibility that Anthony Joshua could be sued for fighting too effectively. Read that again. One of the most legitimate heavyweights in the world might face legal consequences for doing exactly what boxers are supposed to do: win fights. The precedent this would set is absolutely catastrophic. It would mean that every future bout could come with hidden limitations, secret agreements, predetermined boundaries that fans know nothing about. Imagine watching a fight and wondering if the reason someone isn't throwing power shots is because their lawyer told them not to.
Rooting for him, not against him. And think about the views and the fanfare for his comeback fight. Now, I don't totally think this is true, but a little bit of me thinks so. That it's a cynical PR move to change Jake Paul's image, flip the script so he can keep fighting nobodies and people will keep watching. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments.
And now major betting companies are quietly reviewing their policies. Because if outcomes can be influenced through private agreements, if the level of violence can be negotiated beforehand, then the entire gambling ecosystem around boxing becomes legally questionable. Regulatory bodies are scrambling to figure out what kind of oversight they actually have over these new types of arrangements. Broadcasters are wondering if they need different disclaimers, different legal protections, different ways of presenting fights to audiences. The ripple effects of this controversy are hitting every corner of the boxing business, and most fans have no idea how deep this goes.
That's essentially what Jake was doing the whole fight. Sticking and moving, making it awkward. Knew he was outgunned. Right, and if you've ever been in there, right, when you're sparring with someone that just doesn't, they're way outskilled compared to you, right, and you start marching them down, right, they're running around, right, they're clinching up, they're doing awkward things, they're just not necessarily willing to engage, it can be actually kind of hard to get to somebody, right, and Jake does know what he's doing. You know what I mean? Jake's not like some clueless guy in there, but obviously we all knew he is clearly not the caliber of someone as Anthony Joshua, at least he shouldn't.
But here's what really keeps me up at night. If these kinds of arrangements are possible with a global superstar like Anthony Joshua, what's happening with fighters who don't have his leverage? Fighters who desperately need paydays, who can't afford to walk away from bad deals, who don't have the luxury of staying silent when promoters make uncomfortable suggestions. The pressure on those athletes is invisible to the public but absolutely real. Subtle hints about what kind of performance would be appreciated, vague language in contracts about maintaining entertainment value, opportunities that mysteriously disappear when fighters don't play ball. This isn't just about one potential fight between Joshua and Paul. This is about whether boxing is becoming a systematically manipulated entertainment product. Look, boxing has always had gray areas. Fighters have always had to navigate complex business relationships, promotional politics, and financial pressures that the public doesn't fully understand. But this feels different. This feels like we've crossed into territory where the actual violence, the core product that boxing sells, is being treated as a negotiable commodity. And once you start treating real combat as something that can be fine-tuned for optimal entertainment value, you've lost the essence of what makes boxing compelling in the first place. The unpredictability, the genuine risk, the authentic human drama of two people testing themselves against each other under the brightest lights imaginable. Anthony Joshua's legacy is now permanently connected to this controversy, not because he did anything wrong, but because his name got attached to something that represents everything wrong with modern boxing's direction. His career has been built on legitimate competition, real victories, and authentic defeats. He's never needed gimmicks or manufactured drama because his actual boxing ability created enough natural storylines. But now he's stuck in the middle of a situation that threatens to undermine the very concept of legitimate competition. And the most frustrating part is that his silence, while probably legally necessary, allows other people to control the narrative around his reputation. Meanwhile, Jake Paul continues to thrive in this chaos because chaos is his natural environment. His entire career has been built on blurring the lines between reality and entertainment, between authentic competition and manufactured drama. He's proven that you can make millions in boxing without following traditional boxing rules, and that success has given him the power to force established fighters to consider opportunities they would have laughed at just 5 years ago. The problem is that Paul's approach to boxing treats the sport as content to be optimized rather than competition to be respected. And when that mindset starts influencing how legitimate fighters operate, the entire sport suffers. Here's what nobody's talking about, but everyone should be considering. Young fighters coming up right now are watching all of this unfold, and they're learning lessons that could permanently damage boxing's future. They're seeing that social media followings might matter more than amateur credentials. They're observing that narrative control can be more valuable than actual boxing skills. They're noticing that the fighters making the most money aren't necessarily the most talented, but the most willing to blur the lines between sport and entertainment. If the next generation of boxers grows up believing that authentic competition is less important than viral moments, boxing as we know it dies within a decade. So there you have it. What started as rumors about one potential fight has exposed fundamental cracks in boxing's foundation that threaten everything fans love about this sport. Anthony Joshua's reputation is caught in the crossfire of a battle between authentic competition and manufactured entertainment, and the outcome of this controversy will determine whether future generations get to experience real boxing or just elaborate performance art. The scariest part is that there might not be a clean resolution to any of this. The damage to boxing's credibility might already be irreversible. So here's my question for you. Drop it in the comments. Do you think boxing can survive this shift toward predetermined entertainment, or are we watching the death of authentic combat sports in real time? If this breakdown helped you understand what's really happening behind the scenes, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell because this story is far from over, and the next developments are going to be absolutely wild. I'll see you in the next one. Boxing just died, and nobody's talking about the real reason why. Look, we've all seen boxing scandals before. Fixed fights, corrupt judges, sleazy promoters taking advantage of fighters. But this is completely different, because for the first time in boxing history, we're not just dealing with one bad fight or one crooked official. We're dealing with something way more dangerous. The idea that fights can be scripted, that outcomes can be predetermined, that what you're watching isn't real competition but carefully orchestrated theater. And that terrifying possibility has now been planted in every single fan's mind. Think about what that means. Every time you watch a heavyweight fight now, there's this nagging voice asking, is this real? Are they actually trying to knock each other out, or is this just WWE with blood? That doubt, that poison, it doesn't just go away. It grows stronger with every suspicious moment, every weird decision, every fight that doesn't feel quite right. Here's where it gets absolutely wild. This isn't happening in some underground club or small-time promotion. This controversy is hitting the very center of boxing, the heavyweight division, the main event fighters who are supposed to be the sport's biggest stars. When Muhammad Ali fought Joe Frazier, when Mike Tyson was destroying people in 30 seconds, nobody questioned whether it was real. The violence was too brutal, too unpredictable, too dangerous to fake. But now we're living in an era where fighters come with their own social media armies, their own revenue streams, their own massive leverage. And some people are starting to wonder if that power is being used to control what happens inside the ring. The old boxing model was simple. Promoters had all the power, fighters did what they were told, and the best man won on fight night. But platform-driven fighters changed everything. They don't need promoters the same way. They don't need traditional media. They can build their own audiences and make their own deals. But here's the kicker. With that power came temptation. Because when you have millions of followers hanging on your every move, when you're making more money from social media than fighting, when your brand is worth more than your boxing record, suddenly, the idea of controlling outcomes starts making financial sense. Why risk a devastating knockout loss when you could script a competitive fight that protects everyone's image and sets up a massive rematch? And that's exactly what has some people in boxing absolutely terrified right now. Because once that line gets crossed, once fights become entertainment rather than competition, the entire sport becomes professional wrestling. And professional wrestling, no matter how popular, will never have the cultural impact of real combat sports. Now listen to this part. Anthony Joshua's response to all this chaos has been fascinating to watch. He's not out there making grand speeches about saving boxing's soul. He's not positioning himself as some moral authority. Instead, he's doing something much more powerful. He's simply existing as proof that real boxing still matters. This is a guy who's been knocked down, knocked out, written off, and counted out. He's felt the genuine sting of devastating losses where no script, no predetermined outcome, no carefully crafted narrative could protect him from the brutal reality of getting his face punched in. When Joshua steps in the ring, you know he's there to win, not to perform. And in this current climate, that authenticity is worth its weight in gold. His entire career has been shaped as much by his losses as his victories, and those losses weren't part of some master plan. They were real, painful, and humbling. And get this, behind the scenes, the entire boxing industry is quietly freaking out. Trainers are having different conversations with their fighters about what contracts actually mean and what they don't protect you from. Managers are being way more careful about every single word they use in negotiations. Promoters are completely rethinking any crossover events or celebrity boxing matches. None of this is happening publicly, but it's definitely happening. Because everyone in the sport understands what's at stake here. Boxing is already fighting for attention against cleaner combat sports like MMA, against more regulated competitions, against entertainment options that don't come with this kind of baggage. The sport simply cannot afford to have fans stop believing in the authenticity of what they're watching. Hold up, did you catch what just happened in the aftermath of this controversy? Suddenly, all those rumors about other fixed fights, all those whispers about predetermined outcomes, they just vanished. Nobody's proposing celebrity boxing matches with suspicious clauses anymore. Nobody's openly talking about scripted heavyweight bouts. Why? Because the backlash was so severe, so immediate, so damaging to everyone involved that it sent a clear message throughout the entire sport. Cross this line and face the consequences. But here's what's really concerning. The legal side of this mess is still completely unresolved. We're talking months of speculation, accusations, denials, and absolutely zero definitive answers. That prolonged uncertainty is almost worse than if we had concrete proof of wrongdoing. Because in that vacuum, in that space where facts should be, conspiracy theories thrive. But wait, it gets worse. Even if we eventually get a definitive legal ruling, even if someone comes forward with undeniable proof of what really happened, the damage might already be irreversible. Once that seed of doubt gets planted in fans' minds, once they start questioning whether fights are real, that skepticism becomes incredibly hard to eliminate. It's like trying to unring a bell. The doubt spreads, infects other fights, other fighters, other promotions. And young fighters coming up in the sport are watching all of this very carefully.